After 4 decades with Kurt Russell in what everyone considers Hollywood's most rock-solid, golden standard relationship, Goldie Hawn just said something that has the entire internet in an absolute frenzy. In a recent interview that was supposed to be a routine press run about her latest project, the conversation took an unexpected, deeply personal turn. When the interviewer asked about her greatest, most consuming love, everyone expected her to gush about Kurt. We all anticipated that signature giggle, those sparkling eyes, and the usual heartwarming stories of their 40-year unmarried bliss. Instead, the room went cold. Goldie got quiet unusually, devastatingly quiet, and then she dropped a bombshell that is completely rewriting everything we thought we knew about Hollywood's favorite couple. There are secrets we keep not to protect ourselves, but to protect the life we rebuilt from the ashes of what we lost. She began to speak about a man from her past, not Kurt, someone who made her feel things she admits she had never felt before or ever since. It was a love so consuming, so utterly overwhelming, that it nearly derailed her entire career just as she was reaching the absolute stratosphere of fame. At nearly 80 years old, Goldie decided it was finally time to come clean. She is unearthing the one who got away a relationship that has quietly haunted her for over 50 years, and a heartbreaking choice that altered the trajectory of her entire life. To understand how deep this secret runs, we have to look at the official story we've been fed for decades versus the shocking truth that is finally coming to light. And trust us, the reality of what happened behind closed doors is way worse than anyone imagined. Tabloids are scrambling, fans are spiraling, and Kurt Russell is probably needing a very stiff drink right about now. But to understand how Goldie wound up in the arms of a mysterious European stranger, we have to travel back to the very beginning. Long before she was America's darling, she was surviving in a world that was far darker and more ruthless than her bubbly persona ever let on. Long before Goldie Hawn was a household name, she was just a ballet-trained kid from Tacoma Park, Maryland, who quickly realized a brutal truth about show business. She could make far more money shaking it in a cage than doing pliés in a quiet studio. By the mid-1960s, she was dancing at the iconic Whiskey A Go-Go in Los Angeles. Picture it. She was dancing in an elevated cage wearing barely anything, while legendary musicians played below and hungry Hollywood executives scouted the crowd for their next target. It was a high-voltage, dangerous environment a million miles away from the stable life her parents had envisioned. But Goldie was incredibly strategic. She knew the go-go scene was her golden ticket, a way to build a network and get noticed on her own terms without falling into the casting couch traps that ruined so many young actresses. And then, just one event was enough to turn everything upside down. In 1968, she landed a spot on Rowan V. Martin's Laugh-In, playing a bikini-clad, ditzy blonde who giggled her way through sketches. America fell head over heels. But what truly astonished the public later on was the sheer intelligence behind the act. Goldie wasn't dumb. She was a brilliant tactician playing a highly profitable character. While the world was busy laughing at her jokes, her personal life was already fracturing. In 1969, she married dancer and choreographer Gus Triconis. He was 8 years older, stable, and represented the artistic safety she craved. But that domestic peace didn't last long. In 1970, Goldie won an Academy Award for Cactus Flower, becoming an A-list titan overnight. Suddenly, Gus wasn't just a husband, he was Mr. Goldie Hawn. His ego couldn't survive the shift, and the marriage began a slow, agonizing death spiral. Yet behind the scenes, another chapter of her life was quietly unfolding, one that the history books completely omitted. Before the divorce papers with Gus were even signed, Goldie crossed paths with a mysterious stranger who would ruin her for normal relationships forever. Between her official split from Gus and her eventual chaotic marriage to Bill Hudson, there is a suspicious gap in Goldie's timeline. She always attributed this era to traveling Europe to find herself, but we finally know the real reason. During a promotional tour in Europe around 1973, Goldie met a Swedish theater actor named Bruno Wenzel. He was the polar opposite of the Hollywood machine. He possessed a sharp, Nordic intensity, was deeply cultured, and most importantly was completely unimpressed by her Oscar or her fame. To him, she wasn't a highly profitable commodity. She was just a brilliant, funny, breathtaking woman. For a superstar exhausted by greedy producers and superficial relationships, this was pure, unadulterated oxygen. The secret dream, Bruno wanted Goldie to abandon the hollow glamour of Los Angeles. He envisioned a quiet life in a cottage in the Swedish countryside, raising bilingual children, and making art purely for the soul. The psychological toll. For months, Goldie lived a double life, torn between the dizzying heights of Hollywood royalty and the profound, quiet peace of a European escape. The ultimatums. Ultimately, the dream carried a devastating price tag. Bruno wanted her to give up her career, her language, and her hard-earned independence. To Goldie, who had fought tooth and nail to escape the go-go cages of L.A., his romantic dream began to feel like a beautifully decorated trap. It was another man trying to control her destiny. The relationship ended in a tempest of broken promises, harsh words, and a devastating departure. Goldie boarded a flight back to Los Angeles, leaving her heart in Scandinavia and carrying a quiet grief that she would repress for the next 50 years. By the time she returned to the United States, the emotional damage was done. Heartbroken, raw, and desperate to run away from the ghost of her Swedish romance, she rushed headfirst into the arms of musician Bill Hudson in 1976. It was a volatile, famously disastrous marriage that nearly broke her spirit entirely. Looking back, the sudden, frantic nature of that relationship finally makes sense. She was trying to drown out the memory of a love she was forced to leave behind. Goldie Hawn eventually found her peace, her partner, and her lifelong anchor in Kurt Russell. Their bond is undeniable, a beautiful testament to endurance in a town built on fleeting promises. Yet, as Goldie approaches 80, her sudden confession reminds us of a haunting truth. Sometimes, even the most beautiful lives are built around a quiet, empty space where a great, forgotten mystery once lived. If the Bruno situation taught Goldie anything, it was that she needed someone who understood the business, someone who wouldn't resent her success or try to dim her blinding light. Enter Bill Hudson. As one-third of the Hudson brothers' musical comedy act, Bill was charming as hell, quick-witted, and funny enough to keep up with her dizzying pace. They met on a flight to Los Angeles in 1975, and the chemistry was immediate, electric, and undeniable. Bill made her laugh until she cried something she desperately needed after the emotional wreckage of the Bruno breakup and the slow-motion collapse of her marriage to Gus. They rushed to the altar on July 3, 1976, in Tacoma Park. For a brief moment, it actually seemed like Goldie had cracked the code. Bill understood show business. He had his own career, so he wouldn't be threatened by her fame, and he seemed genuinely smitten with her in a way that felt sustainable. Their son, Oliver, was born in September 1976, just a few months after the wedding, and their daughter, Kate, followed in April 1979. From the outside, they looked like absolute Hollywood royalty, the perfect blend of beauty, immense talent, and family values. But behind closed doors, a toxic pattern was repeating itself. And trust us, the reality of what went down next is far more devastating than the sunny family photos let on. While Goldie's career was exploding into the stratosphere, Bill's was rapidly stalling. The Hudson Brothers act was losing its grip on pop culture relevance, his solo projects were landing with a thud, and every single interview he did inevitably became about being Goldie Hawn's husband rather than Bill Hudson, the entertainer. The resentment built slowly at first, then all at once. By 1980, they were barely on speaking terms. They tried to make it work for the sake of the kids. They did the therapy sessions, and they even attempted a professional collaboration with the film Private Benjamin, a production so fraught with tension it nearly tore them apart on set. The official separation came in 1980, and the divorce was finalized in 1982, but the aftermath was ugly in ways that still affect their children to this day. He was a father when it was convenient, and a victim when it wasn't. Bill turned bitter. He began giving hostile interviews, claiming Goldie chose fame over family, that Hollywood had corrupted her, and that she was never truly present as a mother. Goldie, choosing to take the high road, stayed mostly quiet publicly. Privately, however, she was dealing with the crushing guilt of a second failed marriage and the heavy reality of raising two small kids as a single mother in the relentless glare of the spotlight. Oliver and Kate barely saw their father after the split, eventually taking Kurt Russell's last name emotionally, if not legally. Bill spent the next several decades playing the victim in a tragic family story where everyone lost. Most people think Goldie and Kurt's legendary love story began in the 1980s, but the true timeline goes back much further. They actually first crossed paths in 1966 on the set of the one and only, genuine, original Family Band, a Disney movie that almost nobody remembers today. Goldie was 21 and already a working actress. Kurt was just a 16-year-old Disney contract player with a smile that could sell toothpaste. Nothing happened between them then, obviously, because he was literally a teenager, But Goldie later admitted she remembered looking at him and thinking he was going to be big trouble someday. Fast forward to 1983, and they were both in completely different, fragile places. Goldie was fresh off her devastating divorce from Bill Hudson, emotionally exhausted and thoroughly convinced she was finished with men entirely. Kurt was recently divorced from his first wife, Susan Hubley, raising his young son Boston alone and looking for absolutely nothing serious. Then came Swing Shift. The World War II drama reconnected them, giving them an excuse to spend months together on set without any pressure or expectations. The mutual attraction was undeniable, but both were terrified of rushing into something that might blow up in their faces. Their first official date was on Valentine's Day 1984, which Kurt planned down to the very last detail. That was the night Goldie knew Kurt was different. He wasn't intimidated by her astronomical success. He wasn't trying to manage her career, and he wasn't threatened by her past, her kids, or her strong personality. He just liked her. The decision not to get married was mutual and immediate. Goldie had been burned twice by the institution and had learned the hard way that a piece of paper guarantees nothing but expensive legal fees when things go south. Kurt didn't need a wedding to prove his devotion. They moved in together, blended their families, had a son named Wyatt in 1986, and built a life that has outlasted almost every marriage in Hollywood history. But choosing Kurt wasn't the same as erasing the past. So, how did we get here? 40 years into the Kurt Russell era, and the internet is suddenly in a tailspin over a long-lost love. It all traced back to a recent, deeply reflective interview. The interviewer asked Goldie about the greatest romance of her life, fully expecting her to dive into her usual beautiful routine about her 40-year partnership with Kurt. Instead, Goldie paused. She got a faraway look in her eyes and started talking about a love that consumed her completely, a connection that existed outside the normal boundaries of Hollywood. She didn't name names, which has sent fans and internet sleuths into an absolute frenzy, but she described a relationship where she was seen simply as a woman, not as Goldie Hawn, the star. She spoke of feeling completely safe and utterly terrified at the same time, describing a passion so intense it made everything else feel like a rehearsal. And then, she dropped the line that launched 1,000 tabloid headlines. "He was the love of my life, and I let him go because I was young and stupid, and thought my career mattered more than my heart." The internet immediately went into detective mode, trying to decipher the mystery. Was it Bruno, the Swedish theater actor who offered her a quiet cottage and a normal life? Was it Warren Beatty, with whom she shared a brief but incredibly intense flame in 1975, a man who later admitted she was one of the few women who ever made him seriously consider settling down? Or was it someone entirely secret, a relationship so fiercely guarded that it stayed buried in the dark for half a century? Goldie isn't telling, and honestly, that's both deeply frustrating and incredibly brilliant. It leaves us to wonder if the greatest love stories are the ones we live out in the open, or the ones we keep locked away in the quietest corners of our hearts. By keeping the identity of this mystery man vague, Goldie maintains absolute control of the narrative, while acknowledging a truth that clearly still affects her. And trust us, this isn't just some passing nostalgic whim. It is a calculated unearthing of a parallel life she almost lived. Here is what we can piece together from various interviews over the years. Whoever this man was, this explosive affair occurred before Kurt, likely in that chaotic, emotionally raw period between her divorce from Gus and her marriage to Bill, or immediately following the collapse of her second marriage. To Goldie, he represented a completely different life. It was a world where she could be anonymous, normal, and entirely free from the suffocating pressure of being America's sweetheart. The relationship ultimately ended because one of them wasn't willing to compromise. Decades later, as she looks back on a life lived in the blinding flash of paparazzi bulbs, Goldie still wonders what would have happened if she had made a different choice. But what truly astonished the public was that this confession isn't about regret. It's not that she wishes she had ended up with her mystery man instead of Kurt Russell. The truth about what happened is far more complicated, carrying a psychological depth that most people can't even begin to comprehend. It is about acknowledging that you can make the absolute right choice for your life and still quietly mourn what you had to give up to make it. Naturally, the question on everyone's lips is how Kurt Russell feels about this sudden bombshell. Does he know? Is there trouble in paradise? The answer is almost certainly yes. He knows, and he is probably entirely fine with it. Kurt Russell is not a man with a fragile ego who needs to pretend he is the only person his partner has ever loved. He is a secure, mature adult who understands that Goldie had a whole life, a whole universe of experiences before he came along. In fact, he has openly stated in interviews that he actually values her past. He believes her previous marriages taught her exactly what she didn't want, which is what allowed them to build their legendary partnership from the ground up. Kurt's philosophy on their relationship has always been refreshingly, almost shockingly honest. He has repeatedly explained that he doesn't need a marriage certificate to prove his commitment. He would rather wake up every single day and actively choose to be with Goldie than feel legally obligated by a piece of paper. That level of rock-solid security explains everything about why they've survived where other couples failed. He isn't competing with ghosts or trying to erase her history. Their relationship works because they have mastered the art of maintaining separate identities within a shared life. In a town where couples suffocate each other under the guise of romance, Goldie and Kurt have built a unique, carefully structured empire of independence. Separate spaces. They famously maintain separate bathrooms and individual workspaces, allowing them to retreat into their own minds when needed. Independent lives. They keep separate friend groups and pursue solo projects without any pressure to perform as a package deal. The zero scoreboard rule. There is absolutely no possessiveness, no jealousy, and no keeping score. And then, just one simple realization is enough to turn the entire concept of Hollywood romance upside down. The real secret to their unprecedented longevity isn't some magic formula or a trendy couples therapy technique. It is that they are both experienced enough to understand that love comes in different forms and varying intensities. Goldie can openly acknowledge that someone else was her great, tragic passion, while Kurt is her great, enduring partnership. Both of those truths can coexist beautifully without canceling each other out. That is next-level emotional maturity, the kind of rare psychological depth that most people spend their entire lives never achieving. So, why is she finally coming clean now? At nearly 80 years old, Goldie Hawn is thinking about legacy, raw truth, and how she wants to be remembered. For decades, she played the role of America's bubbly, giggling darling. But that persona, while endearing, was never the complete picture. There were deep sacrifices, quiet heartbreaks, and impossible choices hidden behind all that sparkle, and she is simply tired of pretending those shadows didn't exist. However, that glory-filled, bubbly blonde expectation didn't last long once she decided to claim her narrative. There is something incredibly revolutionary about an older woman claiming her full romantic history without shame or apology. We are taught to edit our pasts to make the present comfortable for others. I choose to own every chapter. By admitting she has carried a quiet torch for someone else all these years, Goldie is humanizing herself in a way her seemingly perfect relationship with Kurt never could. She is dismantling the fairy tale. She is telling the world that it is okay to have complicated feelings, to love more than one person across a lifetime, and to make practical choices while still holding space for emotional truths. It proves that the legendary concept of a single, flawless soulmate is complete garbage. Human hearts are vast, mysterious, and entirely capable of holding multiple loves at once, each one building the full, beautiful, and delightfully messy picture of a life fully lived.